Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting this evening. It's a conditional use application meeting involving ELU-McCausland Plank Track at 1130 Horseshoe Pike. I want to just let you know that this meeting is being recorded and will be available, broadcasted over the YouTube channel. Barring any objections from my colleagues, I would like to, at this point, appoint Mark Jonas as the hearing officer for tonight's meeting.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. As the Vice Chairman has said, this is a hearing which is different than a typical township meeting that many of you are used to. It is a quasi-judicial proceeding. The board is acting in somewhat of a legal capacity for the consideration of this application. The applicant will present its case and satisfy the standards. This is a conditional use, which is, it's important for everyone to understand, is a permitted use. That means the request for a conditional use is based upon an ordinance provision or provisions that allow what is being requested as a permitted use, provided that the applicant proves that what they are asking is within the definition and what's described in the ordinance and meets any of these express standards in the ordinance for the grant of a conditional use. And there are several conditional uses that are involved. I'm going to read the notice, which is a little long, but we want to put that on the record. Notice is given that on October 7, 2021 at 8 p.m., the East Brandywine Township Board of Supervisors will hold a public hearing at the Township Building at 1214 Horseshoe Pike, Downingtown, PA, 19335, to consider the conditional use application of ELU-Planebrook Guthriesville, the applicant. Applicant is the equitable owner of 1130 Horseshoe Pike, ID number 3005-0144-0500, and 1136 Horseshoe Pike, ID 3005-0144-0800. In the township, collectively the subject property, which is in the TND2 zoning district. Applicant proposes developing 89 townhouses and associated improvements and requests conditional use approval pursuant to the following sections of the zoning ordinance: 399-27.C2 to permit a traditional neighborhood development in accordance with the TND2 overlay district, parentheses, or 2, section 399-13.1.I to permit reductions of riparian buffers. 3, section 399-13.1C1 to allow the removal or modification of the existing natural vegetative conditions within the first 50 feet of the riparian corridor conservation district. And 4, section 399, the 79B2 to permit landscaping improvements that do not conform to the zoning ordinance guidelines. We have a list of hearing exhibits, a copy of which has been provided to the applicant. These are going to be the board exhibits. They number 1 through 23. They include the legal notice, proof of publication, affidavit of posting, adjoining property list, a bunch of review letters, the application, agreement of sale, various plans, a decision from the zoning hearing board, and also the planning commission in East Brandywine Township setting forth certain conditions. We understand that during the public comment session, the representative of the planning commission, I think, is going to present additional comments and probably supplement what is our exhibit 22. The procedure of this is the applicant will move forward and present witnesses. The witnesses will be available for questions by the board and also available for questions for anyone who wishes to seek party status, and I'll talk about that in a second. After the applicant presents its case, anyone who has requested and been granted party status will have the opportunity to present evidence in support of the party's position. At the end of the entire presentation, there will be public comment, and the board has decided that 10 p.m. will be the cutoff time, so everyone is, I guess, on alert to try to see if we can complete this in one evening. Let's talk a little bit about party status. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, a party is someone who has the right to present testimony and to cross-examine witnesses. By being a party, you also preserve the right to appeal a decision of the Board of Supervisors. The board must render a written decision within 45 days. In general, a party is someone other than just any member of the general public. A party is someone who is directly and immediately impacted by the proposed development in some fashion, again, that distinguishes him or her from any other member of the general public who may have some comments, and those comments will be available. There will be an opportunity at the end. If someone seeks party status, we'll ask them to give their name, where their property address is, the location of the property with relationship to the property of the applicant, and then applicant's counsel, if he wishes, can ask questions and either agree or challenge the standing of someone who seeks party status, and that would be up to the Board of Supervisors to decide whether to grant party status. So with that, with the understanding of party status, why don't we just take an appearance, Mr. Jaros, for the applicant?
Yes. Good evening. John Jarris, representing the applicant.
May I have a point of order, just for the purposes of the record? Chairman Winters has joined us remotely. Mr. Winters, are you able to participate? Can you speak?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Pardon the interruption. Just, we're about to recognize and may have an action item. I wanted to ensure we have all three members present.
Thank you. So does anyone wish to seek party status? Someone, would you please come forward one at a time?
Shall I be first? How far do I come forward?
Why don't you just go to the podium, be fine?
Where the speaker, where the,
Okay.
yeah.
And we need your full name and your address, please.
Okay, so my name is Beth Watts, W-A-T-T-S, and my address is 404 Norland Drive, Downingtown.
And where is that property with relationship to the property that we're discussing tonight?
So we're right off of East Reesville Road.
Did you receive a notice of this hearing directly?
I did, through the HOA.
Are you here on your own behalf?
I am, yes.
Mr. Jaros, do you have any objection?
I'm just trying to get a little bit better clarification, ma'am. Are you in the townhouse development or outside?
Not in the townhouse development. I'm off, just a bit off of that, off of East Reesville Road.
And would you say you're within a quarter mile of this property?
Yes.
No objection.
Okay. You're a party, which means you'll have the opportunity to question the witnesses and to present your own evidence after the completion of the applicant's case, if you wish.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Next.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Winters, and the property I'm talking about is 2069 Bondsville Road.
And where is that property with relationship to the property we're discussing tonight?
At the intersection of Bondsville Road and East Reesville. That's where they want to run the loop through.
And the distance to the edge of their property would be how far?
Couple hundred feet. At least several hundred feet.
Thanks.
No objection.
No objection. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You've been accepted as a party. All right, thank you. That's suitable for framing, you'll find later. Anyone else seek party status? Okay, so we are completed. We have three parties: the applicant and two property owners. Mr. Jaros, you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is John Jarris. I am counsel to the applicant's ELU-Planebrook Guthriesville, LLC of Wayne, who is the equitable owner of this 21.8 gross acre tract of undeveloped land on the west side of Horseshoe Pike, otherwise known as State Route 322, contiguous to and to the southeast of an existing townhouse development at Applebrook known as the Village Towns, located at 2049 Bondsville Road. The legal owners of the property are DNB First Trust / Alan H. McCausland Estate and Sharon Fisherowski. The applicant proposes to construct an 89-unit townhouse community development with associated improvements. The project includes area for a potential Reesville Road extension in accordance with the Township's Guthriesville Master Plan and official map, which you'll hear a little bit more about in our testimony. The parcel is located between Bondsville Road, State Route 4015, and Horseshoe Pike, State Route 322, and is zoned R2 Residential District. The TND Traditional Neighborhood Development District overlay applies to this property, which the applicant seeks to utilize in order to implement its townhouse development. Public water supply and sewage disposal are proposed. The applicant is requesting, 1, a conditional use approval pursuant to Section 39927.C2 for traditional neighborhood development in accordance with the TND2 Traditional Neighborhood Development Overlay District requirements. In addition, the applicant is requesting a modification for a reduced riparian buffer on the southeast portion of the project in accordance with Section 39913.1, point capital C, 1 in paren, small a in paren, and capital I, small 1 in paren. Also, the applicant is requesting authorization from the board to locate a portion of its stormwater management facility in a woodland area pursuant to Section 39958, point capital C, 5 in paren, small f as in Frank in paren, 3 in bracket, small c in bracket. And lastly, the applicant is seeking approval from the Board of Supervisors for a reduction in the minimum planting requirements required under Table 1, Section 399-779, point capital B, 2 in paren, as a result of other design measures related to the site plan, architectural features, and/or landscape architecture in order to achieve comparable results. In other words, the applicant is asking for a reduction in the number of minimum landscape plantings required. We have 4 witnesses planned this evening. They are, in order, Mr. John Mosteller, representing the applicant, Vic Kelly, seated to my left, our project engineer from Commonwealth Engineers. Seated behind me to my left, Rachel Sklan-Vahe, our registered landscape architect. And lastly, and not least, Mr. Matt Hammond, our traffic engineer from Traffic Planning and Design. Why the traffic engineers always go last, I don't know. I am not used to a solicitor as thorough as Mr. Jonas, so several of the exhibits that we have marked and handed up on the applicant's behalf are somewhat repetitive to the exhibits the board has already marked. So I think we've got everything covered. I did hand copies of those exhibits up. They are exhibits A1 through A13, and they will be referred to throughout the testimony. I will say for the record, I handed Mr. Jonas a full, complete set of all those exhibits, and by that I mean there are several cumbersome reports in there with addenda, and Mr. Jonas is in possession of the full and complete copy of all those. I did not include all that addenda in the exhibits I handed up to the board. So you have the reports, but not the supplemental data. That is in the hands of Mr. Jonas.
Mr. Charos, before you proceed, I just want to make a correction. When I read the legal notice, I misread that the start time as advertised by Media News Group was 7 p.m. on October 7, 2021. I was reading an earlier scheduling draft, but this is from the proof of publication, so I want to make sure there's no procedural issue. The proof of publication as it appeared was for the 7 p.m. start time this evening.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. If the board or its solicitor has no questions of me, I would call Mr. Mosteller as our first witness.
I just want to, could you go back to your first paragraph? Did I hear Applebrook?
I was referring to the townhouse development to our northwest, I believe, and I refer to that as
Yeah, and I'm just asking for clarity, just so that we, because there is an Applebrook in West Goshen Township. I don't want that to be,
I appreciate that. I'm confusing the 2 golf courses, so I meant to say Applecross, yes. With that, Mr. Mosteller, I believe you need to stand and be sworn.
Actually, if I, just as an administrative note, if I could ask the witnesses to sit at the table over here. There's a microphone that is a little better quality than the ones that are the remote. And also, there's a set of board exhibits there, but there is not a set of the applicant's exhibits at the witness table. So if you're going to reference those,
We'll have the bailiff over in a minute.
Was remiss in not handing copies of our exhibits to the two parties, which I will do right now.
I do.
John, could you please state your full name and current business address?
John Mosteller, 483 Devon Park Drive, Suite 110, Wayne, Pennsylvania.
And have you formed a special purpose entity, ELU-Planebrook Guthriesville LLC, to develop the property made subject of this application?
Yes.
Is ELU-Planebrook Guthriesville LLC the equitable owner of the property made subject of this application pursuant to an agreement of sale with the current legal owners of the property?
Yes.
Have we marked copies of the first and last pages of those two agreements of sale as applicant's Exhibit A1?
Yes.
And I believe more complete copies are in the board exhibits.
Yes, it is.
Is the property made subject of this conditional use application located at 1130-1136 Horseshoe Pike, owned by First Trust, Alan H. McCausland Estate, and Sharon Fisherowski?
Yes, it is.
And those would be UPI numbers 30-5-144-5 and 114.8. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that property currently undeveloped farmland?
Yes, it is.
And that property comprises approximately 21.8 gross acres, does it not?
Yes, it does.
And the property is located within the R2 residential district and the TND2 traditional neighborhood development overlay district of the township. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And your plan, John, is to develop the property for an 89-unit townhouse development. Is that correct?
It is correct.
And you are here this evening requesting, one, conditional use approval pursuant to Section 399-27.C2, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Also, a reduced riparian buffer on the southeast portion of the project in accordance with Section 399-13.1C1A3.
Yes.
And to locate a portion of its stormwater management facility in a woodland area under Section 399-58.C5F3C and 4, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then lastly, approval from the Board of Supervisors for other design measures related to a site plan, architectural, landscape architecture in order to achieve comparable results for the minimum planting requirements under Table 1, Section 399-79.B2. In other words, asking for a reduction in the minimum number of landscape plantings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And up on the board, behind the supervisors on a screen, is displayed a colored rendering of the proposed development of the subject property. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
And will your engineer, Vic Kelly from Commonwealth Engineers, be testifying in a moment to give more specific details with respect to this application?
Yes, he will.
These are all-
Harris, is that A2?
I believe that is a colored rendering of one of the sheets in our plan set, Mr. Jonas.
Do you have an identification number for that? It's going to be referred to?
If we want to, since we have left off with A13, if we want to refer to the colored rendering up on the screen, why don't we refer to that as A14 if that's acceptable?
Can you just give us the title block for that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly has informed me that is a colored rendering of A3G in our packet.
So it's already been marked as A3G.
Correct.
Fair enough, thank you. And that's identified as the overall public realm plan prepared by Infocus Planning dated July 27, 21, sheet 7.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And again, those were all the questions I had for Mr. Mosteller.
Any questions for Mr. Marcel? It's not that easy. Any questions by the board members of this witness?
None.
So now is the opportunity for the two parties. Ms. Watts, do you, would like to come forward? Do you have any questions of this witness?
I don't know if this is the right time or not. but
Well, why don't you come forward and let me, I take it you're not an attorney, are you?
No,
Okay,
sir.
so examination is related to anything that he said, only what he said, nothing beyond that. So is there anything he said that you'd like to have, you'd ask a question about or to have clarified?
No, sure. Yes, could you point out on the map where you actually want to narrow the riparian border, the requirement for the riparian border?
I think we want to wait till the engineer testifies and.
Yes, ma'am. If there are specific questions with that regard, Mr. Kelly is intimately has the knowledge with respect to those specific issues. He is our civil
All
engineer.
right, and then, well, I would have some other additional questions regarding landscaping, too.
That would.
We also have a registered landscape
defer that.
architect, yes.
And then additionally, I had a question about the changes to Reesville Road. If I could get a better understanding for where that lies on this map and what the plan is for that.
And again, Mr. Kelly and our traffic engineer, Mr. Hammond, would probably be better suited.
So I should come back later.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can, Ms. Watts, and if you find that the witnesses Mr. Jarris has referred to don't answer your questions, we'll bring back Mr. Mostella. Fair enough?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Winters, do you have any questions? Please come forward. Do you have any questions of Mr. Mostella? Would you come forward, please? We have a court reporter, so the Board of Supervisors and the court reporter need to be able to hear you.
I wrote it down on my phone so I could remember.
That's what phones are for.
One of them is, how's the applicant proposing to get sewer from, to their and from their site in the old pump station next to McHugh's?
Our engineer will be glad to answer that.
Okay? And can the township force Applecross HOA to allow this proposal development, the ability to connect in their private streets?
Mr. Mostella, do you
I'm
want
sorry,
Can the township force Applecross HOA to allow this proposed development the ability to connect to their private streets?
I think that's a question for the township.
If that's, you have to only ask Mr. Mostella what he can
Okay.
speak to.
All right, that's,
He's not the township, as far as I know.
I know.
They are.
okay,
Okay?
yep,
All right.
thank you.
All right. Then next witness.
It would be Mr. Kelly.
Is there any particular exhibit you would like loaded for presentation during this questioning? Or is the public realm plan still what you want projected?
I think that's good for now.
Okay.
Luke, thanks. I do.
Vic, your full name and current business address.
Victor Kelly Jr. and Commonwealth Engineers is the company at 114 East Lancaster Ave in Downingtown.
Mr. Jarris, you're prepared to offer Mr. Kelly as an expert, is that correct?
I am, and his CV has been marked as applicant's Exhibit A4.
As an expert in what areas?
Civil engineering.
Members of the board, are you satisfied?
Satisfied.
Yep.
He's accepted?
Thank you. Vic, could you please give the board some background of your involvement with this project since its inception?
Sure. We first started looking at the Plank property probably 5 years ago, looking at the entirety of it. We started with some different sketches. The Planks were hesitant about what portions to sell, and after going back and forth with them, we ultimately were able to secure the property that's shown, and we were also able to talk to the Fisherowski owner and secure that property, and began the sketch plans at that point. So that was probably back in 2018 or so when we started to fully develop this portion of the property.
And since that time, did you then proceed to produce various sketch plans, attend meetings of various township entities with respect to the proposed development of this property for this townhouse community?
We did. We developed multiple sketches looking at this property. We had meetings with the Planning Commission, we had meetings with the Sewer Authority, and we had also a number of meetings with members of the Applecross Village ownership group and the HOA of that portion. Along with some of those meetings were also attended by some Planning Commission members. So through that process, we feel that we've kind of developed appeasing everybody's best interests in the current plan that we have.
And that all culminated in several applications recently filed with the township, one being one for special exception variance relief, and this one for conditional use, which brings us before the Board of Supervisors this evening. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you and your office prepared the plans marked Applicants Exhibit A3A through P, as well as A8, the Stormwater Management Plan narrative, did you not?
We did.
I'd like you to just take a moment, refer to your exhibit list in front of you. Just so the record is clear, we have identified A1 as the first and last pages of the two involved agreements of sale. A2 is a Chesco View aerial photo of the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you just take a moment and go through and identify the names of those plans, all prepared by your office with dates, just so the record is clear what plans we have submitted?
Okay, A3A is the construction overview plan. A3B is the existing conditions plan. A3C is the site grading plan. A3D is the intersection improvement plan. A3E is the common open space plan. A3F is the natural features impact plan. A3G is the overall public realm plan prepared by InFocus, but part of our plan set. Also, H is the landscape plan prepared by InFocus, but part of our set of plans. And I is the landscape plan prepared by InFocus, again, included in our plan, as is J, which is the amenity areas that is included in our plan set.
Can I stop you there, and can
Sure.
you identify who InFocus Planning is?
InFocus Planning is our landscape architect who will be testifying later tonight.
Very good. Could you continue?
K is the potential erosion control plan. L is the drip disposal field plan. M is the proposed roadway centerline profiles. N is the potential Reeseville Road extension plan. O is the Reeseville Road centerline profile for feasibility. And P is the revised Road A centerline profile plan.
Very good. And A4 was a copy of your CV?
Correct.
A7 was a design manual prepared by InFocus Planning, which will be testified to later this evening, correct?
Correct.
And A8 is a stormwater management plan narrative prepared by your office.
Correct.
And I believe those all were dated July 19, 2021. Is that correct?
Yes.
Vic, also, applicants' exhibits A9 and A10. Could you identify them and tell the board how they're relevant?
They are the water and wastewater engineering report prepared by Ebert Engineering, and the relevance is testing sewer feasibility for the drip field. And A10 is the drip field narrative prepared by Matthew Hostrander of VW Consultants, and that is further development of the drip fields with the witnessing by DEP and your sewer consultant.
And the A9 water and wastewater engineering report is dated July 22nd, 2021, correct?
Correct.
And the McCausland Plank Drip Disposal Field narrative is dated July 15th, 2021, correct?
Correct.
We also introduced, Vic, to the board previously this evening, Applicant's Exhibit A13, which is titled Road and Right-of-Way Configuration Plan for McCaws and Plank. Your office prepared that as well. You'll be speaking to that in a moment, I assume.
I did, and I do have handout that application if,
They already have it,
okay, great.
okay? Before we get into the specifics of the application, would you please take a moment and familiarize the board with the property if they wanted to refer to Applicant's Exhibit A2?
A2, I think, Luke, if you could put up A2, that's the GIS map.
I'm sorry, I'm prepared to show up any exhibit that starts with the letter B, but A, I don't have digital copies of it. You brought that with you this evening.
B.
Luke, I think there may be a similar exhibit in the board exhibits.
Okay. Is this the 16-sheet plan?
No, this would be the separate one that was sent, a single sheet with the GIS. But I could probably just use the construction, I could probably use A3A, sheet 1.
Let me interrupt you. Board Exhibit 16 is a Chesco Views aerial photograph of the property.
Possible. It's going to take me a second. Do you want to start? Our equivalent to the 16-sheet plan set is called B12. I'm happy to put up B12 if there's a sheet that you can use for that, and I'll hunt down the other exhibit.
I think for this purpose, I can use what's on the board, and I can start by saying that at the right-hand side of the sheet, as we're looking at it, the north edge is our intersection with Route 322, and the property is just south or southeast of Wright's Insurance building, which is in that corner right there.
There we go.
And that, to the upper right, the property is bordered on the north with the McHugh property, and then to the west is the Applecross Village neighborhood, all the way down along the edge, and the remaining southern property is all retained ground by the planks.
And the property comprises approximately 21.775 gross acres, correct?
Correct.
And the property is located in the R2 district of the township, subject to the TND2 overlay district, correct?
Correct.
And the property is currently undeveloped farmland, is that correct?
Undeveloped farmland and some woodland on it too, yes.
Let's focus on the proposed development, and please ask Luke to put up whatever sheet of your plan set you'd prefer. But can you please describe to the board what type of development is being proposed?
This is an 89-unit townhouse development. It has a single access road that comes through the spine of the property. We are proposing 2 potential emergency access points that will connect to Applecross Villages, not to be full access easement or access points, but more emergency access, which works for both of those communities, as right now they're single entrances. The townhouse also to the south, we have little driveways for the properties that are running. I guess for discussion, we can call the top of the page north and the bottom south running north-south, whereas the balance of the properties of the other townhouse units are running kind of more of an east-west. It is proposed to be serviced by public water and public sewer.
And the proposed stormwater management facilities will be located in what vicinity of the property?
The stormwater facilities, we have 2 boat basins proposed, both along the southern edge of the property, along the riparian corridor there. There will be other stormwater BMPs, features rain gardens or infiltration trenches when we get into the hardcore design that will probably be scattered throughout. Up in the north end, all what's shown in dark green on this plan is going to be about 7 acres of retained woodland where we will have a drip irrigation system installed. That is going to be the return effluent of the clean effluent from the treated sewage, which will be discharged by gravity and some low-pressure grinder pumps into the internal gravity system in Applecross at a point on Mulligan and/or Parr, and will be treated at the Applecross sewage treatment plant, and then return. The return effluent would come back. There's a force main that was installed in the Applecross Village that goes out to Bondsville, so we would be able to return the sewer to that point, and then it would be distributed through our property to a pump, probably in this area, to utilize the what's shown as dark green upper north end as the drip area.
That's generally an overview of the proposal, correct?
Yeah, I might have got a little in-depth on some of it, but I know some of it will get there.
I'd like you to take a moment and review the applicable requirements as set out on Plan Sheet 1, which, Luke, is, I believe, Board Exhibit 12. It's the first sheet of the 16-sheet set. There we go.
Board Exhibit B12 is now loaded. That's sheet 1 of 16.
Thank you. And if the supervisors were following along with the exhibits that we handed up, that would be applicant's Exhibit A3. I know it's small print, may be difficult to read, but Vic, I'd like you to just touch on a couple of the notes, starting with general notes, and just inform the board how the plan is compliant.
Okay, starting with the general notes. The general notes are just really the base information with regard to the ownership of the properties, the information that's been provided, the fact that it's going to be serviced by public sewer and water, and some of the general notes that are typically on this type of land development, identifying what the parameters are that establish it. Below that, we have the zoning criteria, starting with the density, and the density is based on a gross area of 21.775 acres, which permits an overall density of 7 units per acre, which would be 152 units. With this plan, we're proposing 89 units, which is a density of 4.1 units per acre. The general square footage of these units is going to be between roughly 1,100 and 1,300 square feet, which is one of the requirements in section 39930-B-4, which is the area and bulk regulations. The minimum lot width requirement is 18 feet. The units proposed are 24 feet wide, and the front yard setback is going to be established, as has been determined with lots of discussions with the Planning Commission, based on the setback from the existing cartway or the existing sidewalk, whichever is relevant, and the minimum of 20 feet to make sure that there's ample room for parking in front of the garages and the buildings. The side yards are a 10-foot requirement, which we comply with, and the minimum rear yard is 35 feet, which we also comply with.
And just again, back to that discussion with the Planning Commission, is it my understanding then that the applicant is establishing 20 feet from the face of garage to either edge of cartway or edge of sidewalk?
A minimum of 20 feet, yes.
Okay.
So I think some of the averages were 21, 22 feet. And there is some staggering of units, so again, that'll vary, but it would be a minimum of 20 feet.
What was the width again? Did you?
The unit width, the minimum requirement is 18. Our proposed units are 24.
For the width of the drives?
Oh, the drives,
Or doubles?
doubles. Yeah, so we would anticipate the ability to park 2 cars there.
And again, the units being proposed at this time are 24 feet wide by 55 feet long, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If I failed to have you focus on any particular area and bulk requirement, is it your testimony that the plan notes contained on sheet 1 do show compliance with all specific applicable requirements? Compliance.
Yes.
Okay. Could you please take a moment and elaborate a bit more on the public sewer system, how that was designed and how it will operate?
Okay, yeah, and again, I started to get into that. Right now, there are gravity sewers to the west in Mulligan, and there's gravity sewer, a terminal manhole at the end of Parr Lane. We can get the bulk of our units into those by gravity, but there are a few of the lower units at the southern end that would need grinder pumps. And in discussions with the sewer authority, their preference is to have single grinder units for each specific unit. Most likely, those would run on the backside of the units out and would pump up to what we're labeling Road A. That would flow by gravity into the Mulligan, and then that would go over to the pump station over on Bondsville, pumped to the treatment plant, and then would have to be returned to, again, there's a force main at Parr that will be extended, and then we'll probably put it, this will be further developed as we design the plans, but it's anticipated that we would have a pump station or control house along the entrance coming in before the townhouse unit. So that would be where the effluent's returned, and then that would have the pumps to supply this whole area up in the northern end, which is the sewer drip irrigation fields.
If someone were to ask, well, how do you put drip irrigation in established woodlands, what would your response be?
I would say that it's done with a chisel plow that goes down about 8, 10, 12 inches and just opens the earth up, puts in about a 1/4 inch or half-inch perforated pipe, and any large trees or roots they work around, and that will be part of the design when they do that. Most of the smaller growth, the understory, will be cleared out beforehand, but essentially after that is installed, it's almost like it was never there, and essentially there's no disturbance. It's not trenches are dug, excavated and backfilled. It's essentially a chisel plow that just lays that perforated pipe in.
And that pipe is established how far below grade?
Typically, I think it's 8 to 10 inches.
Okay. The treatment plant you referenced, which treatment plant is that?
That is the Apple Cross Treatment Plant?
And that has capacity to service this proposed development?
It does, yes.
Can you also focus for a moment on the proposed stormwater management and any related testing for those systems and the proposed stormwater management location, related testing that was done, and refer to any particular reports, please?
Mr. Jarvis, just so it's just clear and we can define the focus, since this is a conditional use application and you will be following with land development.
That is correct.
So does this line of question direct to the conditional use standards?
It is. We're not going to get into any level of detail. I'm just trying to have Mr. Kelly explain what he did to establish those systems, their propriety, and whether they can function.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did do a lot of preliminary testing for infiltration rates, and they were not great, obviously, down along the stream. And we have done a conceptual design that is included in our Exhibit A8, the Stormwater Management Plan and Narrative, that has been reviewed by the Township engineer at a conceptual level. And I think we've demonstrated that we comply with the codes at this stage of the game, understanding fully that we have to go through the full land development process. We have to get the MPDS permit from the Chester County Conservation District and DEP. So this is kind of step one of a number of steps to get all of that approved.
But I believe, as Mr. Jonas was inferring, you didn't draw a circle on a plan. You did some analysis as to the location and propriety of those stormwater basins, correct?
Absolutely. We ran full hydrologic reports on those, demonstrating some, just to not get in the weeds, but some of the criteria for the township are reducing the 10-year post-development to the 2-year pre-development, those types of things. They've been designed to that level. We didn't get into the real nitty-gritty, but We've definitely gone through, established the drainage areas, established the piping, getting to the storm sewer or the storm water management basins, and actually routing those basins using our typical software.
And again, as Mr. Jonas was referring to, a further land development, for those ladies and gentlemen in the audience who are not familiar with this concept in totality, if this application is approved and the applicant moves forward, its next task is to file a fully engineered land development plan with the township where all those civil engineering details are submitted by you and then reviewed by Pannoni Associates, Mr. Klein, in much more detail, correct?
Correct.
And also will be the subject of public meetings, planning commission.
Absolutely. Vic, can you focus on the future road connections for a moment? I believe the two for emergency access, and explain how they've been designed and how they intend to operate.
Well, very early on, it was kind of determined in meeting with some of the residents of Applecross that they did not want a permanent connection for ingress and egress to connect the two. And right now, we have Parr Lane is extended. There is an existing right-of-way to the property line, and there's an existing easement provided for access. For what we're providing is also an emergency access. So when we say emergency access, typically that's done with grass pavers or something that vehicles are not using on an everyday basis. It's just what it sounds like. It's an emergency access. If for some reason our entrance or their entrance was blocked and there was a fire or an emergency of some sort, you could get through. Normally there are chains or removable bollards or something to keep the normal traffic out, but that the fire department can get through. So that's the whole means of the emergency access.
And just so I'm clear, in case any residents of that townhouse development were asking, that connection is clearly for emergency vehicles only, correct?
Correct.
Or in the event of an emergency evacuation,
Correct.
not daily traffic?
Correct.
Okay. And there's another one?
There's anticipated to possibly have one at Mulligan. We will have a cul-de-sac next to the property line at the west end. There is not an easement there that we're aware of right now, but we've had discussions with the HOA, and we're hoping that we can resolve something. Again, this is a mutually beneficial to both neighborhoods because Applecross Villages also only has one single access at this point and no other means to get in and out. So it seems kind of like a win-win for both neighborhoods.
Okay. Can you describe the desire to maintain a protected buffer between our proposed development and the village townhome development to our northwest?
Yes, as part of our early discussions also with this homeownership group and the neighbors and the HOA of Applecross, there's an existing tree line along their southern property, our northern property, and we wanted to make an effort to preserve that. And what that did was it shifted all the units to the south, and there's a creek an unnamed tributary on the south end of the property. And the way the township code reads is there's a 100-foot riparian buffer. It does have a modification in there that allows you to reduce that buffer to 50 feet. And the stream is not, it's a cold water fishery, which is not a specially protected watershed by the state. It's not a high quality or exceptional value. And typically DEP and the Conservation District only require 50 feet of setback. So what we're asking is to make it more in accordance with the state and county guidelines. And what that does is we leave a 20-foot buffer up at that north end that will preserve the existing tree line. And as our landscape architect will explain later on, we will also enhance that with additional landscaping along that, within that buffer area.
So is it fair to say that in order to try and accommodate a buffer between us and the existing townhomes to the northwest, we've kind of scooted the proposed development southeast? Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Okay. Can you address the proposed common open space areas and reference any plan that helps depict how that's being designed and laid out? I believe that's sheet 5 in our
It is
plan
sheet
set.
5. Yeah, the open space is a little bit of an odd in the ordinance, in that under section 39930B5H, open space for the TND2 is not required. But then it goes on further to say that if you provide it, you need to provide 20%. So we've gone through the exercise just to show where we stand in regard to that. And the 20% requirement is 4.4 acres. And what we have on this sheet 5 is we show 2 areas of open space. One is the drip irrigation area, which is all a preserved woodland. I think it's a little over 7 acres. And then we show the other side of the road, the south side of the road, and along the stream corridor with the basins, that's about 5 acres. So we're at 12.4 acres. So we're actually providing about 56% open space in those 2 areas.
Okay. The property is not located in a floodplain district, correct?
Correct.
It is not located in a watered hazard soils overlay district, correct?
Correct.
But the parcel is located in the riparian corridor conservation district as it contains a perennial stream, an unnamed tributary to Beaver Creek, is that correct?
Yes.
And the applicant is requesting a modification to the buffer requirements of section 39913.1I1 from 100 feet to 50 feet, including allowing certain improvements, i.e. stormwater management facilities and driveways within the proposed 50-foot setback area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you give a little bit more explanation as to that request?
Well, first of all, it was the request is made to provide the buffer up at the north end. But the second part of the request is simply because it's more consistent with what the state and the county are requiring with regard to those stream setbacks. The whole idea of a riparian buffer is to improve the water quality before it enters the tributary. In this case, by putting our detention facilities in these areas, both below, we're catching most of the water that comes down off our townhouses, off the roads, and then we're treating it. And the basins are going to be, we're calling them wetland treatment facilities. They're going to have some ability to hold some water. It's got to be infiltrated or evapotranspirated in 72 hours. But we're going to make naturalized basins that really more enhance the water quality, enhance the property itself, because they'll be able to grow up, and there'll be some tree plantings in there, and all water-resistant plants, or plants that like the wet feet type situations. So we feel that we're improving. Right now, this whole area is a cornfield that runs directly into the tributary. And what we're doing is proposing to collect all that, put it through the basins. As I mentioned earlier, your codes require that the amount of flow you let out is greatly reduced from the pre-development values. Not only that, in the requirements, instead of looking at what are your runoff values for a cornfield, the model, we need to model that as though it's a meadow, and meadows have very low runoff values. So there's already a lot of compensation on how much runoff is leaving through there. It gives it the ability for the water to settle, any sediments in the water to settle out and be uptaken in the plants.
Is there anything more than related to the riparian corridor setback?
I don't think so.
Okay. The parcel's also located in the steep slope conservation district, is it not?
It is.
And a special exception was obtained from the Township Zoning Hearing Board via a decision dated October 5th to locate part of the primary access road and related utilities within the steep slope conservation district, was it not?
Yes.
There is no historic resource located on the property, correct?
Correct.
But there is an historic resource on adjacent properties, I believe a Class 2 historic resource numbers 146 and 150, is that correct?
Yes, I believe it is.
Has the applicant been directed to prepare a historic resource impact study, otherwise known as an HRIS under the ordinance?
Not at this time.
Do you feel one is necessary, and if not, why not?
Well, I think first of all, the property we're referring to is the Wright Insurance Building. Our only structure within 300 feet is the drip irrigation, which will be buried, and the road entrance, which is obviously at grade. And as Rachel will testify to later tonight, what we're doing is any open area in this field, or this is partially wooded and partial open ground. We're going to be planting a lot of trees in that area, so it will be buffered.
But having said all that, the applicant is willing to go to the Historic Commission meeting on October 13th, as requested by the Township Planning Commission, to discuss any mitigation of impact on the nearby historic structure. Is that a fair statement?
That's true.
Very good. Were there any other marked exhibit reports we may have not referenced in your testimony? I think we also have a copy of the Pannoni review letter, Mr. Heinrich's review letter, and the Hydroterra letter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Vic, I'm going to then close with these questions. Have you reviewed the specific applicable criteria and standards for conditional use approval specific to your field of expertise under Section 399-137.D, as in David, of the Township zoning ordinance?
I have.
And do you have an opinion as to whether the applicant has shown compliance with those specific applicable criteria and standards specific to your field of expertise through your testimony and exhibits entered here this evening?
Yes, I feel we're in compliance.
Is there anything else I may have missed?
Not to my knowledge.
Those are all the questions I have for Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Members of the board, do you have any questions?
None for Mr. Kelly, no.
No, not at this time.
Chairman Winters, is he on?
Chairman Winters, can you hear us? I'm sure he's muting between.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions of Mr. Kelly?
My only question would be, how would the proposed connector road be implemented later on? How would that affect your drip field area and your woodland preservation area? You know, if the township, were to try to do that later on.
Mr. Winters, you raise a question which I have now realized I forgot to ask Mr. Kelly.
813?
Yes. Vic,
Mr. Winters, can we have 813 and then get back to your question?
I'm sorry?
Can we hold your question and have some additional testimony regarding to Exhibit 813 and then bring you back for your question? Would that be all right?
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Winters. Vic, our plans set exhibit, or sheets 1 through 16 of Exhibit A3 depict a certain roadway connection out to Route 322. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
And that's been described as Road A on those plans, correct?
Correct.
In further discussions with the Township Planning Commission, did we talk about a potential relocation of that Road A in conjunction with a future connection known as the Reeseville Road Extension? And did we mark that as applicant's Exhibit A13?
We did. And Luke, is there a way that you could pull up sheet 14?
Actually, I anticipated that of the exhibits marked A13 would be most likely to be referenced by you, and I can load A13, but it's the only applicant's exhibit I've anticipated you calling. That's the sketch for
Okay.
today. So I can, whichever exhibit you'd like to reference, I'm prepared to.
This works fine. And just to explain what this is sheet 14 of our plan set. It's on the master Guthriesville plan. It had shown potential connection or extension of Reeseville Road. Through our many meetings with the Planning Commission, there's been lots of discussion about how that could potentially work and the impact that it would have on our sewer drip field, as well as what the feasibility in the long term is. It's been determined that at this juncture, it's not feasible to extend that road. And we're trying to design our drip field and the intersection so that if it ever does become feasible down the road, we still have the ability to provide 100% of our sewer needs and also give the township the ability to extend that road, again, if that potential ever comes to be. What we discussed however, the impact, as you point out, is that it eats into the woodland area, number one, but number two, the drip area. But the drip area is an overage. It's 150% of the actual requirement for our development, which is as far as I understand, it's a saldo requirement that the Board of Supervisors have the ability to waive if need be. Our thought was to provide the road that accesses our development and dedicate or give easement to the township of the entire drip area, similar to what they did in Applecross, where they provided open space, easement through the open space to put the Reeseville Road extension. So there would be the ability for the township to extend that if it ever came to be. One of the discussions we kind of honed in on last night with the Board of Supervisors.
Planning Commission.
I'm sorry, the Planning Commission, is Exhibit A13, and that was to construct the first couple hundred feet, as indicated in green, to accommodate what would be a future Reeseville Road extension with a little wider width, a little wider right-of-way, and then create an intersection, which is indicated in blue, which would be a little wider 24-foot cartway as kind of the main entrance into the development portion that we're proposing.
Let me stop you there
Okay.
because I want you to be descriptive. The green hashed portion of Reeseville Road extension out to 322 would be a 50-foot right-of-way and a 28-foot cartway with concrete vertical curb, correct?
Correct.
Then the blue hashed portion of Road A coming south of that road off the T would be a 37-foot right-of-way and a 24-foot cartway with Belgian block curb, correct?
Correct.
And then the remainder of Road A into the site in the red crossed hatching would be a 37-foot right-of-way and a 20-foot cartway with Belgian block curb for the remainder of the road. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the rest of what is shown as potential future Reeseville Road extension on Exhibit A13, which goes to the west or left of the document or plan, is essentially just an illustrative depiction of where that Reeseville Road extension, if it ever happens, would go.
That is correct. And actually, as part of our plan set, we did take it one step further, and we ran a profile to demonstrate the feasibility. Doesn't mean that's where it has to go. We're just showing that it could go there and it is feasible.
But as far as actual road construction, and I want this record to be clear, this applicant, as part of this application, is only constructing what's in the crossed hatching on Exhibit A13.
Correct.
The colored crossed hatching, yes.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Winters, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and then as far as the stormwater, obviously that would be designed to handle the potential extension for that slopes in that direction, or is that would be like in part of your preliminary plan?
At this time, we did not anticipate any, and I'm not sure I fully heard the question, but if you asked anything to the left or west of our intersection, we did not plan on taking any further than this, just to show feasibility.
And Vic, I'm sorry, I did forget one other question, just so again the record's clear. We have a requirement under that saldo provision you referenced earlier to provide for 150% of our treated sewer effluent to be disposed on our property, correct?
Correct.
The road configuration depicted on A13 will reduce that 150% to approximately what?
About 135%.
So we want to again make clear that if the board approves of this road configuration with the T intersection as recommended by the Planning Commission, it will in turn have to approve a reduction of that 150% disposal to 135 approximately, correct?
Correct, yeah, there still is some testing going on, and that's a great point, John. And just to be clear, when we have the road that we have designed and the road that we submitted the plans on, we meet that 150%. So anything that we do to accommodate the Reeseville Road extension diminishes our ability to meet that 150%. And we just want to make sure that it's clear that if the township accepts the dedication of that roadway and any future reduction, they've also got to grant the waiver for that reduction in the sewer drip area. Now,
Okay, I think this is where the audience could get confused. Jason's question, I just want to reiterate, Jason's question was about Jason, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought it was about stormwater, not sewer. So the way I understood his question is, your potential roadway in the future, is there enough stormwater accounted for in this project right now for that said project in the future, or is it just for your immediate uses today?
it would be for our immediate uses today. It would include what's shown in green in this portion. So anything that we're building with this project would be included in our stormwater management.
Okay, so
Any,
you guys are going right up to your threshold for stormwater management, not above?
correct.
Okay. I think that would answer his question.
Mr. Winters, is your question answered, or do you have another one?
Yes, Kyle clarified as well. I was just, my question was really, I said sewer, but it's really kind of everything that would be potentially necessary for the extension roadway on the property, you know, whatever stormwater, whatever slope that way, you guys are gonna be able to design the basins to be able to handle that down the road, as well as how that affect the sewer or your open space or another possible subdivision through, you know, HOA's common open space. Just those different things I wanted to just kind of make sure is addressed.
Thank you. Mr. Jarvis, does that complete your testimony?
With the exception of one more question. Again, Vic, so the record's clear, anything shown on Exhibit A13 or on Exhibit A14 to the west of the T intersection for this proposed development, where it's identified on sheet 14 as Reeseville Road Extension, that would be the obligation of the township to complete at some future date, should Reeseville Road Extension ever happen, correct?
Correct,
Just want to make clear, it's not this property owner or this applicant's obligation.
correct.
Very good.
So I have a question real quick, just before you guys wrap up with Mr. Kelly. The streets, we've gone over this plan a few different directions, so I'll backtrack a little bit. Is this dedicated to the township, or are you guys going to do an in-house association?
With the current layout that's shown on the screen, if it was green, the green portion, I would have, and this was really established last night, I would suspect that that would be dedicated or potentially dedicated. In the interim, we expect all the roads to be private and maintained. This is similar to Applecross Village in the 37-foot right-of-way and the 20-foot cartway. So that's kind of where we came up with a design to be consistent with that neighborhood. We expect that all the HOA would take care of all the plowing, most likely all the lawn maintenance and all that sort of thing as well. So yeah, these would all be private streets as well.
Okay, so I guess that's probably going to be the biggest concern of the future, is if you have half of a road right now that's the entrance to your development as a township-owned road.
Right.
That takes you to your development, and then it converts over. There's going to be probably, I'll leave this up to Benoni and I'll leave this up to our solicitor, but this is probably going to be one of the hardest issues to resolve any future problems with, because you're going to have a development entrance for at least the first, I don't know, 500 feet.
Yeah.
A township, and then stop, and then an association continues.
I think what we would most likely propose is that the HOA will own and maintain that until such a time as the township is willing to take dedication.
Or, Vic, we could make a continuing offer of dedication
Yeah.
of that green hashed section of the road.
Yeah. And Kyle, just to be clear, we did say that the whole drip area could be dedicated to the township. So again, this is one feasible way. There are many others, and there may be some things that come down the road that you may want some flexibility to change it. So that was, the thinking was, we want to give the township the ultimate responsibility, and then you know where the drip is. We feel that we can provide over 100% above what the right-of-way and the roads shown now, and above, I mean north, so that it gives the township the flexibility to work that roadway as best fit at the time.
Does that conclude your questioning, Mr. Jarvis?
It does.
Any other questions of Mr. Kelly by the board?
None.
Chairman?
Yeah, none, my next ones would be for the traffic engineer, so I'm good.
Ms. Watts, do you have some questions of Mr. Kelly?
So, going back to, actually, we might as well stay on this page right here. So,
When we say page right here, just so, that just let's identify it by
agreed.
number.
So it has a number 1 in the right-hand bottom corner.
This is A13?
A13.
A13.
Right. So this particular demonstration, and I heard the proposal to grant this, I understand, to the township, so that the township would be responsible for maintenance, ownership, and further decisions on that potential greenway and the extension to Reesville Road. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So what, if any, evaluation has been done regarding the impact to increased traffic and noise along that area there that would impact the rest of Applecross that may not be part of this townhouse?
There is a traffic engineer who's going to be testifying next, so you want to
Oh,
hold
I
that
should
question?
hold that?
For the
Okay.
traffic engineer?
Okay, I can hold that one for the traffic engineer. Let's go back to, so the riparian border, I don't know which exhibit would be the best one to look at for that one.
I think you could use the overall presentation plan. I mean, that,
Yeah, the colored one
Okay,
would be
The
better.
colored
yeah,
one?
yeah.
So.
It's a little difficult to see the detail on the colored one. There is another one, and I don't know what the number is, so I apologize, that shows exactly where each of those units are getting close to that, and I understood that there was a consideration that it was not an important stream, but that is a portion of Beaver Creek there. And there are 4 units in particular that get very close to that area. And so the concern would be that if you look at the detailed plan, it's much easier to see on the larger blown-out plan that the property values or the property lines there for each of those get very, very close there. I don't know what the actual number of feet is, but it does appear to be quite close. So where you say you're bringing it down to less than the 100-foot recommendation of being away from a riparian border, bringing it down to 50 feet or potentially less. Certainly the concern here is if you
Ms.
look at the
Watts,
corners that...
Just so it's clear, we really need kind of as much as you can focus on a question that
Yeah.
that Mr. Kelly can,
Okay,
it's,
fair
and you
enough.
have an opportunity to make comments later, but right now, we're just trying to get through the witnesses, so could you direct a question to Mr. Kelly?
fair enough. So, so for, it would be property values 67, 68, 88, and 90 that do get awfully close there. And considering that Beaver Creek does in fact swell and flood at some times, it may not be a flood designated area, but what's been the consideration of the impact of these particular properties being so close to that riparian border and any potential runoff, because those lawns would in fact most likely contain pesticides and additional nutrients that people put in their own properties and land.
If I may, it's just a point of order. The projected on the screen is Exhibit B12, first sheet, and I've zoomed in on the units that you've referenced. Please proceed.
Okay, I mean, all right, I guess I'll start by saying the 50-foot riparian buffer is this line here. So those units do not go into the 50-foot riparian buffer. The riparian buffer, as dictated by the state and the county, is a guideline that's used for riparian buffers for streams. This is, it's not me that designates it, it's the state that designates what the stream is qualified as. And in this case, it's a cold water fishery. So they're the ones that say, we want that 50-foot buffer, but you can build up to that 50-foot buffer line. So I guess that would be my answer is we're providing stormwater that's going to be picking up there's inlets here that are going to pick up the runoff from these. There may be some bypass area there, but overall for the whole site.
Just fundamental rules when we talk about here and there with the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Yep.
if you, 'cause
Below those units, there are some areas that may be what we call bypass areas, but the large majority of the flow from this site will be directed into the detention basins and will be attenuated. And as far as the quality of the water, it's going to be enhanced from what is currently running off there now.
That is a farmed area, correct?
That is agriculture, it's cornfield now, which has a very high runoff rate, very high pollutant load rate.
And then who maintains those runoff areas that you say they'll go down into?
The HOA.
The HOA?
Yeah, yeah, there will be a professional management company that comes in on a daily or weekly basis and mows the lawns, maintains the basins, it keeps all that stuff up and running.
Ms. Watts, keep in mind that these kind of nitty-gritty details are really gotten into by the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, Township professional consultants during land development. This is, in an overall sense, this is a zoning application, not a subdivision application. So, and zoning, in a broad sense, really talks about the use of the land, and then subdivision gets into the details of the improvement of the property, the construction of improvement. So always keep in mind that we're not bypassing things, just that land development, we're really getting into the details of stormwater management, et cetera.
Understood. But my concern was just the proximity to the creek.
Sure.
Yeah.
You have
Okay,
another question
thank
for
you.
Mr. Kelly?
And I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winters, do you have questions of Mr. Kelly?
No, but for the township I do.
Well, we're not testifying right now, so this is from Mr. Kelly. But thanks for asking. Mr. Jaros, your next witness, please.
That would be our landscape architect.
I do.
Rachel, your full name and current business address.
Rachel Sklan-Vahey, 407 Wellesley Road, Philadelphia, PA 19119.
And are you employed, and if so, by whom and in what capacity?
I'm the owner of Infocus Planning.
And are you a registered landscape architect in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and have you lent your professional services to this project in that capacity?
Yes.
Have you
Mr.
te-
Jaros, you're offering this witness as an expert.
As an expert registered landscape architect, Mr. Jonas, and her CV is in our applicant's Exhibit A5.
Members of the board, do you accept credentials?
Yes.
She's accepted as an expert.
Thank you. Rachel, could you please describe your charge in being involved in this project?
Sure. I was approached by the applicant to review the zoning and subdivision land development code in regards to landscaping and public realm plan requirements.
Those are two requirements under the ordinance for such a TND2 development, correct?
Yes.
If we turn to applicant's sheet A3H, which is LP2 under our sheets submitted, is that a copy of your landscape plan?
Yes. Sheets 8 and 9 are the landscape plan.
Using that and any other plan you feel sufficient, can you orient the board as to your proposed method of landscaping the project?
Sure, I think, could we put up the overall plan? I guess the color plan to start. Sure. This shows the overall site as described by the applicant and also Vic Kelly, the project engineer. Basically, there's a main road that goes through the development. There's certain requirements for landscaping in both the zoning code and in the subdivision and land development codes. Thanks. So I basically go through the code and look at all the applicable requirements for this development. There's some buffer requirements, which are based upon the unit gross square footage and also the square footage of paved area. So that amounts to a certain amount of deciduous trees, evergreen trees, shrubs. There's also some requirements within Saldo, which are in regards to replacement trees and also street trees. As Vic had mentioned previously, up in this area is a large wooded area, which,
This area, for the record, is the northwest portion of the site?
yes,
We're looking at A3G again?
yes.
Yes.
Yes. So the intent is to preserve as much of that as possible. And also, we discussed wanting to preserve the buffer along the Applecross townhome development. We will also be supplementing the existing vegetation along that area. To the south or east here, I guess, there's the riparian corridor, which we will keep intact as much as possible. And also the stormwater basins have vegetation planned for within those, which would be, as Vic had mentioned, also species that are adapted to the stormwater basin to provide habitat, to help with runoff. Street trees are proposed along the main entrance here, and also where we have room within the units. There's also in the rears of the units where they back up to each other, there's a buffer landscape. So that's sort of an overview of the requirements, which is buffers, street trees, replacement trees.
And the sections of the zoning ordinance you're referring to are 39979 for buffer and screening plantings, correct?
Right,
And Saldo, section 350-53.C for replacement trees, correct?
correct,
And lastly, Saldo, section 350-54.B, capital B as in boy, for street trees, correct?
correct.
Is it a fair statement to say that, in your experience, it's a pretty rigorous set of requirements for landscaping?
Yes,
Is it also fair to say that with the property that's left after we save the existing woodlands, or preserve, I should say, existing woodlands in the northwestern portion of the property, put in the townhomes and the streets and the stormwater management, we have then limited area left for
Yes.
these plantings, correct?
very much so.
And is it a fair statement to say that we are not in 100% compliance with those requirements?
That's correct.
Is there anything the applicant can propose to try and mitigate the deficiency in those landscape requirements?
Yes, I think once we go through into the land development process and some of these stormwater areas are more refined, we will hopefully have more room to plant these basins more heavily. We also are going to have a nature trail that sort of goes around the site. There'll be opportunity to plant along there, and within the riparian corridor itself, there's probably opportunity to do some riparian corridor buffer restoration areas.
So as Mr. Jonas referred to earlier, we know we have to proceed forward with a land development plan application should this application be approved. And one of the things in that land development application, again, is a landscape plan fully detailed, correct?
Correct.
but it's the request of this applicant from the board to allow the applicant to plant less
Right.
than what the ordinance requirements require,
Yes,
and work with the applicant through land development in that regard. Is that a fair statement?
yes.
Are you going to quantify the reduction?
Have we done an analysis, Rachel?
Yes, we have,
And what does your analysis show?
I'm just gonna pull that here. Well, there's, it's kind of broken into the separate requirements that Mr. Jarvis spoke about. Some of the landscaping requirements come under zoning section 399-79, which is buffering and screening of visual impacts. And this is based on a combination of amount of plant material per square footage of gross building area and also square footage of paved area. I will say that, you know, as we move through land development, the size of the buildings, I think, could change somewhat, and the amount of paving could also change somewhat. So this is definitely in the neighborhood of where we would be talking as far as quantities and things like that, but it may, as we go through land development, shift slightly in the positive or negative. Mr. Jarvis, would you like me to go through?
No, I'm
each
just
of the
noticing on your
requirements?
sheet that we've marked applicants exhibit A3H, your landscape plan, you
Yes.
do have a total landscape proposed as far as shade trees, evergreen trees, ornamental flowering trees,
Right.
shrubs, and perennials, do you not?
Yes,
Okay.
But we don't know what the shortfall is.
right,
Did you do an analysis
Yeah.
of the shortfall?
yes.
What did you conclude?
I guess based on the zone, I separated into zoning requirements, and I guess the ones that fall under the subdivision land development. For the zoning code, which is section 399-79, you're required, for the gross building areas, you're required 470 deciduous trees. We're proposing 119 shade trees and 101 ornamental or flowering trees. That results in a deficiency of 250 deciduous trees. We would be required 940 deciduous shrubs. We're proposing 141 deciduous shrubs. That's a deficiency of 799 deciduous shrubs. Required 470 evergreen trees, proposing 93 evergreen trees. That's a deficiency of 377 evergreen trees. Required 940 evergreen shrubs. We're proposing 177 evergreen shrubs. That's a deficiency of 763 evergreen shrubs. And those requirements are specific for the gross building area. Then under the same section, zoning 399-79, you also have requirements per square footage of paved area. For that, you would be required 69 deciduous trees, 137 deciduous shrubs, 69 evergreen trees, and 137 evergreen shrubs. And for those requirements, the plan does not propose plant material.
So again, I want to go back to the requirement itself. If you had an acre
Yep.
of undeveloped land, how many trees would this landscape ordinance require you to plant?
Generally, if you had a mature woodland, you'd have about 100 trees per acre.
100
Which
trees?
is sort of, indicative of this area. As far as what that breaks down per acre, I basically looked at it, what it would be requiring per unit, I guess, which is approximately 5 to 6 deciduous trees, 5 to 6 evergreen trees, and about 20 to 24 shrubs for each of these units.
And again, in your experience, a pretty rigorous landscape ordinance.
Yes, and also the area that we're utilizing to to build on the farmland area is largely open area, and we are replacing sort of that open area which is devoid of vegetation currently, besides cropland. That's where we're proposing most of our improvements. And then the large wooded area, which we're proposing to retain, that contains a considerable amount of landscape that, you know, if you looked at a woodland, like I just said, a mature woodland in southeastern Pennsylvania has an average of 100 trees per acre. And now if we had that area available, if that was open and we could plant that, that would pretty much offset where our deficiencies are. We just don't, we're maintaining that so we don't replant that, but we don't necessarily have the space in and around the units for the plant material since we're preserving the wooded area.
And I know I didn't ask you to prepare it as an exhibit, but if Mr.
Right.
Jonas required us to submit those numbers you just reviewed, we would be willing to do that, correct?
Sure.
Could you give just the last four numbers you said?
The last four numbers,
Or I think where you were planting none of those, four categories.
sure. That was for the per 1,000 square feet of paved area. We would be required 69 deciduous trees, 137 deciduous shrubs, 69 evergreen trees, and 137 evergreen shrubs.
Thank you.
And this is specifically for the zoning section 399-79. There are other areas where we are providing what is required. And I guess as far as the saldo sections, I could go through those if we want to, if you want specific numbers.
These are new numbers or numbers you've already given?
No, these are different numbers.
So why don't you give us all of the numbers?
Sure. Yeah, the previous numbers were specifically related to the zoning code. And then there's also requirements that Mr. Jarros noted in subdivision land development, replacement tree code 350-53C. You're permitted to remove 25% of existing woodland prior to requiring replacement of that woodland. We are removing 30.89% of woodland. Therefore, we need to provide replacements for the difference between the 30.89% and the 25%, which equates to 192 trees and 319 shrubs.
192, and what was the second number?
319 shrubs.
Thank you.
And lastly, street trees. Street trees are required along the right-of-way for the roadway. Based on the proposed roadway length, we'd be required 178 street trees. We're providing 109 street trees. That would be a deficiency of 69.
And Rachel, again, for the record, the zoning ordinance with respect to those zoning ordinance landscaping criteria under section 399-79
Yes,
permits the Board of Supervisors to modify those landscape requirements under 399-79, capital B, 2 in paren, does it not?
correct.
Very good. Did you also, or can you please address the design manual concept with the amenity areas? I believe it's sheet 10 of the plan set describing what's proposed for the project.
Sure. Do we have sheet 10?
So I am loading board exhibit B12 and sheet 10.
Correct, sir. Is that a copy of the design manual?
Well, sheet 10 is, speaks to some of the amenities of the development. The design manual is a separate document.
And again, Rachel, is this an illustration? Perhaps you can comment on some of the amenities proposed?
Sure. As part of the Guthriesville Village Manual of Written and Graphic Design Guidelines, there's certain amenities that are discussed that should be proposed as part of the TND project. Within the development, we're proposing 3 pocket parks. We can go back and I can show you the locations after we look at this sheet, but these areas here are showing pocket parks, which would have hardscaping and some gazebo or pergolas, benches, trash receptacles, would be utilized as a gathering space for the community. They'd be accessible via sidewalk or via trail. And we're showing some examples. This is in the neighboring Applecross community, so something similar to that. You also would be required to provide benches. As I mentioned previously, there'll be a trail proposed within the community. Along that trail, we have discussed providing some fitness amenities. There'll be some areas with some benches, so you could overlook the natural stream corridor and the proposed stormwater management basins areas. So in total, I guess there would be 3 pocket park areas. There would also be a trail in the woodland area, and then a trail that sort of goes around the perimeter of the site in total.
And your design manual that you prepared on the applicant's behalf under applicant's Exhibit A7 is again further
Further,
illustration of those areas?
Correct.
Can you please reference the overall public realm plan, sheet 7 of the plan set?
Sure. Could we go back to the color version?
Yes, for the, since they are slightly different records, what is sheet 7 in B12? There is a colorized version, which we
G.
are calling A3G, is
Yeah.
that correct?
Pretty sure it's G.
So
Yeah.
now projected is applicant's exhibit A3G.
Sure. Yeah, this is basically, as we referred to this plan before, it shows the overall site. As far as items that are part of the public realm plan, the pocket parks that I had mentioned previously, there's one as you come up the road adjacent to Unit 1. This would be a pocket park, again, with some benches, gazebo, some shade provided. There's also one in this area adjacent, sort of nearest to Unit 68, I believe, along the trail. Again, that would be another opportunity for congregating, benches, community gathering area. And the last public amenity area is right off of the cul-de-sac at the rear of the site. And then there's a trail proposed to go around the existing wooded area. There's also trail proposed through this area. And I believe that, if there's potential connections nearby, we would look to link these trails. So they're available for our community and neighboring communities.
And Rachel, was that public realm plan prepared as prescribed by Section 399, 30 point capital B as in boy, 5 in paren, small c in paren?
Yes.
Overall, is it your opinion that the applicant has complied with the design standards regarding the public realm plan and the design manual?
Yes.
And have you reviewed the specific applicable criteria and standards for conditional use approval specific to your field of expertise in Section 399, 137, point capital D as in David of the Township zoning ordinance?
I have.
And do you have an opinion as to whether the applicant has shown compliance with those specific applicable criteria and standards specific to your field of expertise through your testimony and exhibits entered here this evening?
Yes, it's my opinion that the applicant has complied with those specific applicable conditional use standards in that section through my testimony and exhibits introduced as part of this application this evening.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
Questions from the board?
No, we're going to hear from the planning commission later on, right?
Right, you have any
Okay.
questions of the witness?
No,
Mr.
not at this
Scrivens?
time.
No, none of this. witness.
Mr. Witness, you have any questions for the witness? No, not me. No, not the Chairman Winters. Chairman Winters,
Yes.
you have questions of this witness?
Is there, I do. Do you have like a generalized estimate of the cost per your different types of like vegetation that you can share with the board? Just that way we could
Sure.
have it on the record.
Yeah, I mean, I guess generally, depending on the quantity of trees, they can vary in cost. Obviously, the more trees that you need to purchase, the lower the unit costs go down. You know, a deciduous shade tree, depending on size, could be anywhere from, $300 to $500 probably installed, and, evergreen trees would be maybe in the $180 to $250 range, shrubs, $50 range, somewhere of that nature. Again, quantity, drives down unit cost, so it would be dependent.
Okay.
Any other questions, Chairman Winters?
No, I do not.
Ms. Watts, do you have any questions of the landscape architect?
So, thanks for that presentation. So, I do have a couple of questions. So, given the fact that it's a significant number of deficiencies in the total number of plants.
Agree.
So, given that the property is going to have increased impermeable surfaces, and we've got a reduction in what's required by the current ordinance, what's the impact overall for runoff, both stormwater and stream
Right.
protection?
Well, I think Mr. Kelly could speak more about how he comes up with the stormwater calculations. There are certain requirements that he needs to achieve, pre-development versus post-development, and all of those factors need to be taken into account when sizing the stormwater management areas. That said, aside from the specific engineering point of view, we will be planting these basins that will probably have amended soils to assist with infiltration, if appropriate, depending on the infiltration testing. Every plant that we install obviously also helps absorb some runoff. But a lot of the stormwater is going to be a function of the amount of impervious coverage, which you did talk about, and we also did discuss that we are preserving, a large asset here, which does take up a lot of stormwater volume. And also to speak to your question about some of the deficiencies, if we had, so to speak, more open land area on the site, like say we didn't have 8+ acres of woodland that we're preserving, that deficiency would go down because we would have more area to plant.
And did Mr. Kelly's evaluation incorporate the fact that there would be this deficiency of plantings? Or was that
Yes.
separate?
No, it's all together.
Okay. And then I did have another question too, and this regarded your plan for the actual landscape plants. And I do understand by the ordinance that 75% need to be native plants, and I did
Right.
see a good number of native plants in there.
Right.
I didn't do an actual evaluation of the
Sure.
percentages, but I did notice that there are 4 that are identified as invasive plants, and I would request and
Right.
wonder, can those be replaced?
Sure, as
make-
like we've spoken
it
to
instead.
before, this is going to get refined. We're going to go through the whole land development process where there will be reviews by the township consultants. They will weigh in on species, quantities, placements, locations, all of those things will be further refined as we move forward, and there will be time certainly to refine plant lists, increase natives where appropriate, et cetera.
And can it be identified specifically that invasive species would be excluded from the plan,
Sure.
the final plan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. And would the public be able to review those, or is that not
So,
open to
so
public?
you're now a party of stature, so you're gonna get notifications across the board as things
okay.
progress. But the other thing is, as we go through, if we go through, stages with anything, you know, the planning commission meetings, both the zoning, the board of supervisors, those are the opportunities. So, every month, the agendas will be posted online, and if you see, or if you're receiving certification that there is a meeting coming up pertaining to this, absolutely come, because that will be your opportunity to throw ideas and suggestions, you know, out there.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Winters in the back, you have no questions of this witness? No, no. Thank you. Mr. Jaros?
Our last witness is Mr. Hammond, and while he's making his way to the table, I just want to make the board aware that as we talk about a request to modify what we consider a rather rigorous landscaping ordinance requirement, we did want to remind the board that the applicant is making land available to the township for the future Reesville Road extension at no cost to the township. In other words, if that road were sought to be put in at some future date, there's a condemnation and a fair market value procedure involved for any public road. And this applicant is willing to make that property available at $0 to the township, which we hope would have the board's consideration when they're talking about landscaping shortfall.
Since you brought that up, what is the monetary value of that roadway for the continuation, not to 322, but the continuation portion? Do you have a?
We have not calculated that to my knowledge, but I'll defer to Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly reminds me we're also subject to a $185,000 traffic impact fee. I wouldn't guess. Fair market value is.
Is Mr. Kelly going to respond to that question?
I think it's about 500 or 600 feet, but I wouldn't venture a guess without giving it some, you know, a little more pencil to paper.
Was the question with regard to lineal feet of the road or about fair market value?
Fair market value, and the reason I brought that up is because I think it's important for both audience and for you and for the board to understand that, you know, there is give and takes in a lot of situations, and, you know, obviously, as much detail that can be answered before the board prior to their decision 45 days after the hearing, you know, whether it comes in today or whether it comes in tomorrow, I think it's important that that justification does come in, so that it's something that can be weighed in.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Jaros, I understand from your statement, so the offer of the easement, the future easement, is the offer to essentially the quid pro quo for the landscaping deficiency. You're not offering a condition with regard to the conditional use application regarding the landscaping deficiency as to what you might commit during the land development phase in terms of to make up for that deficiency.
That, I believe I understand the question, and the answer to that is no. We're not looking. What I'm suggesting to the board is when they hear that this applicant is requesting a modification of landscaping requirements that could be a rather large number, as evidenced by Ms. Watt's comment, I'm asking the board to take into consideration the applicant is also offering land at $0 cost to the township for a future road connection. That's the only statement I'm making.
Thank you.
I do.
Matt, your name, full name and current business address.
Sure. Matthew Hammond, Hammond, 1025 Andrew Drive, Suite 110, Westchester, Pennsylvania, 19380.
And are you employed, and if so, by whom and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Traffic Planning and Design, Inc. as the Executive Vice President.
And are you a registered engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the specific field of traffic and engineering?
I'm a registered professional engineer practicing as a civil engineer specializing in traffic and transportation.
Jaros, what's the offer with regard to Mr. Hammond?
We are offering Mr. Hammond as an expert traffic engineer, and his CV is in our applicant's exhibits. That's A6.
I'm very familiar with Mr. Hammond's expertise. I would recommend that we accept him as an expert.
Okay, that's fine.
He's
Thank you.
accepted.
Thank you. Matt, did you prepare a traffic impact study on behalf of the applicant in conjunction with this application for conditional use?
Yes, I did.
And have we included it in our packet of exhibits as applicant's exhibit A11?
Yes, sir.
Could I ask you to take a moment and take the board through in executive summary form your analysis, your findings and conclusions, and summing up with your recommendations for this proposed townhouse development?
Sure. So as Mr. Jaros has mentioned, Exhibit A11 is a traffic impact study that was completed for the Plank Farm residential development. It is dated July 21st of 2021. Prior to completing that traffic study, significant coordination occurred between myself as well as the township traffic engineer to talk about the study area and the parameters of such a traffic study. In addition, due to the fact that the development has proposed to take access to a state road, we also coordinated with PennDOT as to also the parameters of that traffic study. Based on the feedback we received from not only PennDOT, but the township's traffic engineer, Mr. Heinrich, we did complete the traffic study and looked at various scenarios. Many of those scenarios revolved around the possibility of the East Reesville Road extension occurring, as well as scenarios involving the extension, direct access serving the development to Route 322, and scenarios that involved no extension and just access serving the development. So there are 4 separate scenarios that were included in Exhibit A11. We also looked at a horizon year or projected year of 2026, so approximately 5 years from now, to look at the roadway conditions, assuming obviously various things were going to occur. Most of those things revolved around other adjacent developments proposed, as well as some additional growth in traffic during those next 5 years. We also looked at scenarios with and without the improvements that are proposed to the intersection of 322 and Bondsville-Hopewell, which I know that have been quote-unquote on the books for almost 10 years at this point. But we were requested to look at the scenario if those improvements were to occur and the scenario if those improvements were not to occur. As we typically would for a traffic study, we looked at the access point to 322. At the time, we assumed the location of that access point would serve the development, which it will continue to serve the development, but the only difference would be is if the Reesville Road extension happens sometime in the future. So we looked at that access point, site distance perspective to make sure there is sufficient site distance on the road. We wanted to place that access in such a location that it would serve the development as well as the potential for the road extension. We conducted traffic counts. Those traffic counts were conducted during the pandemic. However, there are certain adjustments that we utilized in regards to those counts. Thank you. Certain adjustments that we utilized to adjust those counts to account for the COVID, the reduction in traffic volumes due to COVID, which were based on PennDOT methodology and have been accepted with respect to any traffic counts conducted during the pandemic. We then obviously analyzed the development in our traffic study. We had assumed 90 townhomes. The plan, I believe now at this point, is 89. We then looked at those various scenarios and the impact the development would have on the roadway network, assuming East Reesville Road were to be extended and assuming Eastville Road were not to be extended. The results of the analysis are summarized in the executive summary, which is the fourth page, of Exhibit A11. And essentially what it says is that from a level of service perspective, the proposed development will meet all PennDOT and Township criteria in terms of operation and safety. And we go on to talk about certain roadway improvements that we would suggest relating to this scenario where the East Reeseville Road extension were to not occur. And those improvements involve widening on 322 in front of the proposed driveway to provide for a 125-foot deceleration lane or right turn lane coming down 322 into the driveway, as well as a 125-foot long left turn lane into the driveway when you're traveling north on 322. Obviously, that would involve provision of certain radii, stop signs, pavement markings, striping, things of that nature. But those are the recommendations that we have made with respect to the access point or Road A only serving the development. If Road A eventually extended through, or Reeseville Road was eventually extended through to Bondsville Road, the deceleration lane would actually not be needed anymore because of the fact that the likelihood, there would be less volume of people traveling south to make a right on the extension in order to get back up to Bondsville Road. The left turn lane would still be necessary and would obviously be there, but the right turn lane would not be needed. However, since we do not know if the Reeseville Road extension would occur or not, we would have to proceed as if it were not going to occur and have to provide that deceleration lane. In regards to that, in regards to the intersection itself, as I had mentioned, we proposed those certain improvements. There are some other adjustments or minor improvements relating to striping and signage that would occur into the site, especially at the location where Road A would come into the proposed Reeseville Road extension. And I don't recall the exhibit number. What's this?
813.
A13. I'm referring to the exhibit that Mr. Kelly had testified to, showing the Reeseville Road extension and Road A coming in at the stub. So essentially that's the gist of the traffic study and the improvements that we have proposed.
And Matt, again, just to be specific, your Table 1 establishes the levels of service on your studied intersection after development, correct?
Correct. Table 1, which is entitled Level of Service Delay Seconds Summary, is essentially just that. It's a summary of the levels of service through the study area intersections for the various scenarios I described, not only during existing conditions, but future conditions without the development, and then future conditions with the development, again, based on those 4 scenarios that the Township traffic engineer suggested we analyze.
And do those studied intersections both after development operate at acceptable levels of service, assuming the recommendations you make with regard to road improvements?
Yes, the one caveat to that is whether or not the improvements to the intersection of Bondsville and Hopewell and 322 occur. We have very little impact on that intersection. However, obviously with certain improvements that are proposed at that intersection, they would need to occur and assumed to have occurred by the projected year assumed in the study.
And Table 2 is your recommendations both without Reeseville Road extension and with the Reeseville Road extension, correct?
That is correct.
And looking at Exhibit A13, did you have any trepidation whatsoever with regard to the design being proposed with the T intersection?
I did not. And quite frankly, with respect to how we analyze the driveway, this, as far as Exhibit A13 is concerned, even though Road A would come in at a stub to Reeseville Road extension, I would look at that as a de facto driveway until such time as the extension were to continue through to Bondsville Road. In other words, whether or not that's classified as an extension or it's classified as the driveway to the facility or to the residential development, it would still operate in the same fashion.
Are you able to comment on the knowledge you have with regard to the Reeseville Road extension being made available, and whether or not you believe that may come about at some time in the future?
So I have worked on a number of projects within the township over the last 15 to 20 years. I'm aware of the Guthriesville Village Master Plan and the various concepts that have been put forth in that plan regarding not only the Reeseville Road extension, but other potential improvements within or and around the village of Guthriesville. I could not tell you whether or not that improvement would occur at some point in the future. However, we have designed it to accommodate that improvement in the future and have assumed an analysis that takes into account the possibility of that extension coming to fruition at some point in the future, at least from a traffic perspective.
Did we receive a review letter from the Township Traffic Engineer, Mr. Heinrich, dated August 26th, 2021? And if so, was there anything in there that you found unable to address?
No, most of the comments contained in Mr. Heinrich's August review letter pertain to the site plan and would be dealt with during the land development process. There were a few minor comments with respect to the traffic study and analysis conducted. However, I would point out that there is a comment within the study, or I'm sorry, within the review letter, specifically comment number 5, where Mr. Heinrich suggests the possibility of widening the approach of the Reeseville Road extension at 322 to provide for 2 lanes, a separate left and a separate right. That is something that I will be discussing with Mr. Heinrich, as I don't feel it's necessary, especially if Reeseville Road extension were to occur in the future. It would require approval from the adjacent property owner due to the widening in the radius that would be necessary. To put it into perspective, we are proposing approximately 33 trips in the morning and 20 trips in the evening, exiting out of that driveway onto 322, which is approximately 1 vehicle every 2 minutes in the morning and 1 vehicle every 3 minutes in the afternoon. So it's not a significant amount of traffic that we're anticipating. In addition to that, I would expect that our analysis is actually better than what is depicted in the study due to the fact that there's more than sufficient, gaps in traffic on 322 that would accommodate those 33 vehicles. And when I say 33 vehicles exiting in the morning, that's a total of 33. That's 22 going left and 11 going right. And then in the afternoon, it's 13 going left and 7 going right. So not to make a long story or a short story long, but that's the only comment that I think would require future discussion with Mr. Heinrich, but I believe that we would be able to address that comment with Mr. Heinrich through the process, in addition to the fact, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, anything that we do as it relates to 322 would be subject to a review and approval by PennDOT.
And lastly, Matt, I'll ask you for your professional opinion as to the standards and criteria of Section 399, 137, point capital D as in David, small e in paren, that the capacity of the road system providing access to the property has sufficient capacity to accommodate the use, and that when the incremental increase in traffic attributable to the proposed use is superimposed upon the existing use of the road, will not lower the level of service of the road or any portion thereof of any street intersection below an acceptable level of service? And if so, what is that opinion? Do we meet that criteria?
We do meet that criteria with the caveat that the roadway improvements recommended within Exhibit A11 are implemented in conjunction with the development.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for Mr. Hammond.
Question from the board.
So I'll start, and this is gonna sound like a broken record, I've said it 100 times to every developer who's ever come in the door. My biggest concern with any development is 4 things: snow, bus, fire, and parking. Those are my big ones. Have you talked to the fire department about the possibility of the fire truck getting around the cul-de-sac?
So I have not had those specific conversations. I believe that would be a conversation Mr. Kelly would have. However, I would mention that within Mr. Heinrich's letter and some of those site plan comments that I talked about, he does talk about providing information, and I believe it has been provided to date, but providing information within the plan set that shows that emergency vehicles can circulate through the site. Just as if we would on any land development plan, whether it's delivery trucks, whether it's emergency vehicles, whatever it may be, that they're able to circulate through the site, and if not, obviously adjustments would need to be made.
Okay, because I get concerned with the cul-de-sac, with the units and the cul-de-sac, because they have a tendency to park in the cul-de-sac, and then you don't have that radius that you used to have anymore. So that would be the first one with parking. I'm sorry, with the fire. The same, obviously, the same issue. We're going through another development right now where the kids are getting picked up, and we're trying to work it out with the bus company so that the bus can actually get into the development to pick those children up,
Right.
so that they're not going out, in your case, to 322. The snow, have you guys, would that be you or would that be Vic for the snow plowing, push patterns, where it would go, what?
Well, I think that's something that would be worked out with the HOA in the long run, but just to back up just a little, I have reached out to the fire marshal. I have actually sent him a plan showing some of our layouts and where fire apparatus is and that sort of thing, and requested to meet with him. I have not heard back yet, and I expect that we'll be resolving that through land development. The cul-de-sac has been designed to comply with the current township code. One of the things that was discussed with the planning commission is if the specific turning template for the fire department needs to expand that cul-de-sac or something along those lines, we would be willing to do that, obviously. We would want to make sure that that's compliant. With regard to the school district, that was also discussed with the planning commission with, are we going to potentially need some parking spaces out at 322 if the buses do not come in? We are going to pursue that with the school district to see if they will come in. We know that Downingtown in some areas will come into cul-de-sacs and turn around, so we're hoping that that is the case. Did I miss one?
Parking. So I see, again, we're looking at very small maps here. If or if not, the Reeseville Road happens or doesn't happen, where that spine ends right now, the green hatching, I'm thinking out loud, but I'm just thinking because we're still in the very, very beginning stages, that would probably be a good area to consider overflow parking, for something of, not necessarily in the road right away per se of the future that was discussed, but in that vicinity. And I guess my question is pertaining to stormwater and to drip field irrigation, is that a possibility at this juncture?
There is a possibility that we could do some additional parking. We actually just had a neighborhood that we needed to put, 6 or 8 stalls at the entrance, so for the parents waiting for the bus. I would have to go back and research. I don't recall that we had drip on that side, on the south side of the street. With regard to stormwater, all that will have to be handled during the land development. As these impervious numbers change, increase, decrease, whatever, we will have to adjust the stormwater accordingly.
I just wanted to make sure that I got it on record with you guys that would be something that, I could foresee as being a great utilization of that area. Again, if this does or does not happen in the future, this Reeseville extension, I think it would be a lost opportunity to have an overflow parking that would benefit. You don't have to go far to the Applecross development to see parking is an issue. And, anybody wants to have a party of, say, 15, 20 people, where do you put them?
So just to be clear, to be clear, there is, and I know we're looking at a smaller plan, but I believe there are 47 additional parking spaces, you know, in various locations throughout the development that would be considered overflow parking spaces. I believe Mr. Kelly had testified to the fact that it is a two-car garage. The driveway does hold 2 cars. It's at least 20 feet deep, and I think everyone has their own experience with respect to whether or not people park their car in the garage. But there are about 47 other spaces dotted throughout the development that would allow for overflow parking. And again, this is something that we can discuss during land development. I personally, from a traffic neighborhood perspective, would just be a little bit hesitant about putting overflow parking on that Exhibit A13 on the green section.
I'm actually thinking right where the green hash ends, in that area, not necessarily even in the right of way of the road. I'm talking about in that vicinity as an area that, A, could be utilized if necessary for a bus turnaround, for parking of cars, for usage of the trail system, for many things. So that's what I'm.
Understood.
And just for the clarity, the parking requirement is 2.25 per unit, which is 200 units. And if we take full credit for 2 in the garage and 2 in the driveway and 47 visitors, we're at 403. So we feel pretty good about that. I think it's realistic to say maybe you get 1 car in the garage, and that still leaves us with 314.
Right.
So that leaves 3 on each lot and 47 for visitors. So we feel pretty good about the parking, and we know that that's always a concern in these types of neighborhoods.
Is street parking allowed in this neighborhood?
There are 47, the 47 visitor parkings are perpendicular parking stalls,
Like
scattered throughout.
overflow parking spots?
There is no parallel parking proposed.
Okay.
Parking will be prohibited on both sides of the road, but for those perpendicular spaces, as Mr. Kelly had mentioned.
Okay.
The exhibit is A3A in the applicant package.
I guess my last question was, I think you touched upon it, but you're dealing right now with Mr. Heinrich, I think is where I got to the answer of this question regarding the 322 area for the deceleration lane. If your proposal right now is not including the decel lane for proposed Reeseville Road extension.
So my proposal, because until I'm told otherwise, the Reeseville Road extension is not occurring. So I'm under the assumption that we are looking at essentially what is shown on Exhibit A13, which is the stub of the East Reeseville Road extension with Road A coming off of it at a T intersection. If all we are doing is serving the neighborhood, the proposed development, then my proposal is to provide for the deceleration lane as well as the left turn lane. If the extension comes along at a future time, it is possible that the deceleration lane may still be necessary, but even if it's not, it will be present. Unless, again, the East Reeseville Road extension occurs at the same time that we are moving through the land development and PennDOT processes. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have no further questions.
Mr. Sherback, do you have any questions?
I'm good.
Mr. Winters, Chairman Winters, do you have questions of Mr. Hammond?
Yes. What kind of roadway would the Reeseville extension be considered?
So I believe there's been some discussion with Mr. Heinrich as to what we would classify, or what that road would be classified as. On Exhibit A13, you will see that the green portion, or that first portion of the extension coming off 322, has been designed with a 50-foot wide cartway and a 50-foot wide right-of-way and a 28-foot cartway with curbing. Mr. Heinrich has discussed or mentioned in his review letter that upon moving forward through land development, if we are successful at this stage, that further discussion be held with PennDOT as to the design of that section of roadway, whether it be what's classified as a medium volume driveway or whether it's designed to local road standards. That'll be something that we will continue to coordinate with Mr. Heinrich and the Township on, as well as PennDOT. As I mentioned, ultimately, we will have to seek approval from PennDOT by virtue of a highway occupancy permit.
Chairman Winters, do you have other questions?
Yes. As far as the future connector road or the possibility of it, you are aware that it is depicted on the official map for a comprehensive plan?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Are you aware that the road extension is on the comprehensive plan and the official township map is the question, I believe?
I am aware that it's in the Guthriesville Village Master Plan. So I believe, yes, that I'm aware it's on the comprehensive plan as well.
Did you hear the answer, Chairman Winters?
Yes, I just wonder, how would the community access the northern part of the open space and woodland preservation area if the roadway were to go in the future? How would the community access that open space? Wouldn't that easement that Heinrich requested create another subdivision where you wouldn't be able to access all that land north?
If you're referring to the land, what I'll say is behind the Wright Insurance Agency, is that the land you're speaking of?
Yeah, and then northwestern, down towards the light at Snowco, all of that land on, like, if you would just look at, I guess, if you would just look at whatever the extension is, exhibit that is under.
So, I'm sorry. My answer to your question would be that, Mr.
I guess number
Heinrich,
14.
Exhibit 14,
If you would look at 14, all of that land north of the Reeseville extension, wouldn't that all have to be an easement to the township to not create another subdivision down the road? And because no one's going to be able to access that open space for that community?
so I'm not 100% sure. I'm clear on the area that you're speaking of. However, what I would say is that Mr. Heinrich has asked that certain pedestrian accommodations be provided at this stage in the Reeseville Road extension, and that with the right-of-way that is being offered by the applicant to the township for the completion of the extension, there would be sufficient room within that area to provide for sidewalks and a logical location for a crosswalk would occur at the intersection of the Reeseville Road extension and Road A.
But wouldn't that create just having a 50-foot easement, wouldn't that create another subdivision, a roadway?
I don't believe so, Mr. Winters. And this is John Jarris, counsel to the applicant.
Mr. Jarvis,
thought that was a
we really need the
newer
testimony
revision.
coming from witnesses.
I'm trying to answer the gentleman's question, but
But you're not a witness, so if the witness can't answer it, then.
understood.
But we need one of the,
Can you answer that question, Matt?
I am not familiar with the law with respect to the right-of-way and
Thank you.
subdivision.
Chairman Winters, do you have any other questions?
No, not for Mr. Hammond.
Ms. Watts, do you have questions of the traffic engineer?
Hi. So, sure, I don't fully understand your documents in here, and I didn't really get a chance to take a look at these sections, but in terms of Exhibit A11, page 6, table 7. Is that what you're referring to in terms of increased traffic with regard to the Reesville extension? And how did those numbers, I find it difficult to understand how you could have 90 homes and only expect to have 43 or 54 cars using that extension.
So you're referring to Table 7 on page 6, which
Yes.
is entitled Trip Generation Proposed Site.
Yes,
And what this is a calculation of the amount of traffic that would be generated during the peak hours of traffic. So when completing a traffic study, especially for a residential development, we want to look at the peak hours of traffic on the main roadways and assume that the peak traffic in and out of the development coincide, so that you're looking at a somewhat of a worst-case scenario. The hope is that when looking at that type of scenario, you can determine whatever mitigation may be necessary, and that mitigation would carry through for the other hours of the day when traffic is less on the roadway. So what this is saying is that out of the 90 townhomes, in the one peak hour in the morning, which is the highest hour of traffic between 7 and 9 a.m., that there would be 43 trips accessing the development. That 43 consists of people exiting the development and people entering the development.
that's both ways.
And then in the PM peak hour, it's the one highest hour of traffic between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Again, this table shows that 54 trips would be made during that 1 hour in the afternoon. And it goes on to say that 640 trips would occur throughout the course of an average day. So 24-hour period on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You would have about 320 vehicles in and out of that development.
Okay, and I may have missed this, but what is it just going to be the turn lane that will allow that movement off of 322 onto the East Reesville extension? Is that right, on and off of there? Or is there going to be a light or something else there?
There is no proposed light. We are, as I mentioned, we are proposing to widen along the frontage to provide for a dedicated left turn lane into the driveway, as well as a dedicated right turn lane. So when you are traveling north on 322, passing the driveway on your left, you would have obviously a departure lane, a lane going south. You'd be traveling north, and in the middle would be a left turn lane for the driveway.
Okay,
Conversely, traveling south, you'd have one lane in each direction, then a right turn lane traveling into the driveway.
and then I certainly do have a concern with, the full extension, whether that's on the township master plan or not. I'm not yet fully aware, but should the full extension be continued, have any evaluations been done for that in terms of overall traffic patterns and impact
Yes, ma'am.
to the community?
Yeah, that's, so the East Reesville Road extension, and granted, I wasn't here when that was, the genesis of that plan occurred, but I do know from working on projects in the municipality within the last 15 years, that's been something that's been discussed or contained within the master plan or comprehensive plan for at least 10 to 15 years at this point. So at the request of the township engineer, township traffic engineer, we did assume a scenario where that extension were to actually be effectuated and would come through and connect opposite Bondsville Road, or at Bondsville Road, down through to 322 as depicted on the exhibits this evening.
And did that take into account the additional neighborhoods that are being planned further up Reesville Road?
Yes, ma'am. So it included, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we looked at not only just general growth in traffic, because that just, it happens regardless if there's a specific development or not to attribute it to. We assumed a general growth in traffic as well as a number of developments that are proposed within the area that would have potentially an impact, not only the intersection of 322 and Bondsville Hopewell, but add additional traffic to Bondsville Road, additional traffic to 322 that may have an impact.
And do you have numbers for that?
Those numbers are included within the traffic study. We assumed, obviously, the Weaver track, which I'm sure, based on where you reside, are familiar with. Traffic associated with Mapleview, with the East Brandywine Shopping Center, with the Brandywine Village Shopping Center. There's certain vacancies within that center today. There's a religious use at the old hardware store, and then some additional growth in the area associated with the developments, as well as, obviously, the traffic associated with our development. We assumed, as I mentioned earlier, that we wanted to look at traffic in, a certain horizon, so we assumed all of this, as well as the growth, would occur by 2026.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Winters in the back, do you have any questions of the traffic engineer?
No.
Mr. Jaros, you have no further witnesses?
We have no further witnesses. That essentially completes the applicant's hearing testimony and exhibits in support of the application. We would ask to move applicant's exhibits A1 through, I believe, A13 into evidence, please.
Ms. Watts, Mr. Winters, do you have any objection to the exhibits to which Mr. Jaros referred being included in the record? Mr. Jaros, he's asked that his exhibits A1 through A13 be included in the official record. As parties, you have the right to object to that. Do you have any objections? No. Mr. Winters, do you have any objections?
I had a question for the township and for Mr. Kelly.
No, this is all about, you have a question for Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Jaros, would you just give Mr. Kelly the microphone?
Absolutely.
Mr. Winters, would you come forward, please?
Yes. I was just wondering if you had some personal interest in this project.
Well, I'm going to object to that because I don't know what relevance that has. If we've offered him as a civil engineer in support of the application.
Well, it could affect credibility. I think it's a legitimate question in terms of credibility and bias. So we'll ask the witness to answer.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
The board have any other questions of the witnesses that were presented by the applicant?
I have none.
None.
Chairman Winters, do you have any other questions of the witnesses before we go into public comment?
I do for the engineer, as far as has the applicant provided the municipal authority a new layout from their September 1 review letter where they stated that they low pressure systems were not permitted within their systems?
This is a question to Mr. Kelly.
Have we presented
Yes.
new plans to the municipal authority? No. Have I had discussions with Mr. Baldes? Yes. And I think what you're referring to is the comment regarding multiple units on a low-pressure system, which was what we had proposed, potentially using a duplex system for each building, as opposed to using single-unit grinders for each individual unit, which is permitted by code. And his question was referring to, you're going to have to use the single individual units. Does that answer your question?
Is that what are they okay with that?
As far as I'm aware, there's an ordinance in place that allow for single individual grinder pumps for single units. So yeah, it's in the code.
And,
Chairman Winters, do you have any other questions?
yes. Have you,
Who's this to? To
received-
whom is this directed?
this is directed to Mr. Kelly. Have you received consent from the HOA to tie your emergency lanes into their roadways?
At Parr Lane, there's an easement in place that was part of that agreement. And as far as Mulligan, no, we've had discussions with them, but we would pursue that during the land development process.
Any other questions, Chairman Winters?
No, that should do it.
Thank you. Ms. Watts, this is an opportunity for you to present any evidence. Do you have any you would like to present? No? Mr. Winters in the back, do you have any evidence you would like to present? No, sir. All right, so this would be the time for public comment. I know we have a representative from the Township Planning Commission. Would you like to come forward?
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Buxalis will be joining me on Bruce Rawlings. Do I need to be sworn in, or?
No, this is just comment.
Okay. Not sure of the process, so. Had to find my glasses. Last night, we had our planning commission meeting for our first kind of final look at this project. And we've been working with this for probably 5 years, 6 years, doing meetings and stuff like that. And the applicant has worked very hard in trying to meet all the criteria. And I think we're close to where it goes down to a final yes or no vote at this point. So last night we created a list of conditions, and I don't think, in your packet, I'm not sure what number it is, but we have not had a chance to review what was put into the packet. So I made an updated bullet items on page 2. Did I give you one there?
Thank you.
Jason, I'm sorry I can't give it to you.
That's okay, Bruce.
And I gave it and a lot of these items were addressed or talked about tonight, and I just want to reinforce the condition notes from the Planning Commission meeting. The information above this last section is how we came to these conclusions. So tonight we talked about the roadway from 322, and the applicant has done a new plan today and meets all the criteria we've been talking about tonight, and I think they've done a good job in rectifying that and a possible future extension. Kyle, where you're talking about snow load, one place to dump the snow load would be at the end of that green line. That whole roadway, so that's going to be maintained and until the road goes through. If the road goes through, that's a good place for dumping snow. So we really feel that building this out to the stub line is important to do at this point. We talked about it's going to reduce the drip system from 150 to 135 percent. So we need to have the MU comment on that and make sure that can be done. But we are in full support of what that is, and if this road goes through, it's going to lose another 15 to 20% of that drip field. And we need to talk to the MU and see what their comment is on that particular item. One of the important,
MU meaning the municipal authority?
yes.
Thank you.
Is it MU or MA?
MA would probably, but
Okay, I've seen it both ways. But, emergency access points on Parr Road and Mulligan Road, I feel is a very important access for both developments. And and yes, the Mulligan Road access is not there at this point. It's only a 15-foot crossing. It's a small little area. And for safety for both developments, I think is important to go in. I know the developer will be going over it and talking to them and persuading them to get that particular emergency access. So if we have two emergency access, that would be great. Eventually, in the Pulte development, there's another spot for a emergency access, but that would go over to the extension if that ever goes in. We talked about no parking on the street. That was confirmed tonight. Parking stalls in front of the buildings. We talked about the 20-foot setback. A lot of discussion on the riparian buffer reduction from 100 to 50. And the discussion was more that we agreed about reducing it from 100 to 50, but we didn't, the discussion was now they're putting the stormwater basins in the 50-foot area. And after talking to Nate and what's going on in all the townships in the stormwater, he assured us that this is the correct way to do it and it's a good thing to do. So we at a quorum, we decided to support that, but there were two people that weren't supportive of that out of the 6 people that were there. So that was under discussion, but Nate, do you agree that that's something that's being done now?
Mr. Rawlings said this is really time for comment.
Okay.
So if we just continue with the comment.
Sorry. Important to get the fire trucks and turnarounds taken care of. Landscape waiver, we were agreeing the landscape waiver is okay, and we understood the math, but we wanted to have the ability to come back and make adjustments to it, tweak it, put natural landscapes in there, non-invasives, the right plants for it. Looking at as a landscape architect, I see there's a few more opportunities to add a few more greenery because parts of that development it's pretty stark, and I think we need to be able to have the ability to add a little bit more here and there. One item I asked to make sure they mark on their plans is specimen trees, especially near the right agency. There's some very large white oaks and stands of trees. I think they need to be identified and protected properly. Trail system is good. We talked about historic setbacks, triggers the impact study. They're already on board doing that. They need to make sure they read through Pannoni's letter and make sure they agree with everything there. Same with Heinrich and Terra Professionals. I think there might be a little bit more discussion needs to be read and taken care of on that. So overall, the East Brandywine Township Planning Commission recommends for conditional use. And there are a few things that still need to be addressed, but I think they're close to being there for conditional use. And I guess you're reviewing this over the next 45 days or less. Any questions for me?
Yeah. Did you guys talk about the landscaping deficiencies that arose tonight?
We knew about there was deficiencies, but we would like to be able to evaluate them a little bit more when we get to that point in planning of the development. There's probably still 50% too many plants in the original what could go in there, but there's other plants and other choices, or sizing up plants. Instead of using a 10-foot tree, they use a 12-foot tree. It costs a little bit more money, but they get a little bit more instant gratification. Anything else from me? Mr. Buxell, did you? Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to take the opportunity
Please identify yourself.
Excuse me?
But you have to identify yourself.
Sorry.
For the record. You got a court
Jim
report.
Buxell, I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Commission, live on 1306 Horseshoe Pike.
Thank you.
I just want to emphasize the importance of the Reesville Road extension to the township on a conceptual level, and that's one of has been historically, as far as our working with the applicant, one of the important things that we've discussed at each of our meetings. And the Reesville Road extension is on the township's official map, and it's there for a reason, and it supports the Guthriesville Village town concept and the master plan for that village. And the reason that we created the TND2 overlay that allows for all this density that's going into this area is to feed the Guthriesville village. And the Reeseville Road extension is critical to that happening. Now, I know there's a lot that has to happen in order for that village to come to fruition, but I think that what we do with regard to planning here at the very least needs to allow for the potential of that road being completed in the future. And the applicant's shown a great deal of flexibility, as has the Planning Commission. Stepping back from the 100-foot line to the 50-foot line for the riparian buffer was a significant give. The 100-foot line is a professionally accepted line. The township did not pull that number out of the air and insert it into the ordinance. There's a reason for it. And we showed flexibility in stepping back to 50 feet to allow them to work with their plan and work with the neighboring development at Applecross to provide that additional buffer. One of the things regarding the Reeseville Road extension, however, is the conflict that it has with the drip field area. The municipal authority has historically required 150% of capacity. This design that's up on the board now, is it A13?
A13.
Yeah, A13. Reduces that capacity to 135%. If the Reeseville Road extension was put in along the route that's shown on the drawing, that reduces the capacity to 100%. And I think we need to make these decisions with that fully understood. I'm not sure where the municipal authority is with regard to the 150% issue. I know that it's a topic of interest currently in the township, and I don't understand exactly where they're going to fall with regard to a decision for this development. The Planning Commission is supportive of flexibility in that area. We're supportive of this plan, but I'm not sure where the municipal authority is. So I think you guys need to understand that as far as the conditions you put on this. I think it was Mr. Winters who brought up a very good question with regard to stormwater and the future Reeseville Road extension. And the question is, should the capacity for the future road be considered now in the stormwater system? I think that's a valid question for consideration. Also, taking that a step further, early in the process, there was an option that was presented where they would build the Reeseville Road extension to the boundary of their property. And that option kind of went away as we got into the discussions about the drip field capacity. But I think it's a valid issue to put onto this approval as a condition, consideration of the actual building of the road itself. Looking to the future, if it's just the easement that's provided and a larger drip field is put in, what are the logistics around putting the Reeseville Road extension into an area that would have the drip field? In other words, could that drip field be truncated and the road installed and that area reduced once it's understood what is actually being used? Or does that create a design issue? So those are the items that I bring to the fore for your consideration.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, Jim.
Any questions or?
No?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Ma'am, please.
My name is Joyce Hammond. I live at 224 Sills Lane in Applecross. And I have a question about the number of homes that you're putting there. Okay, now this property, did I understand correctly that the 89 homes are going to be basically on 7 acres, and that you have the open space and where the drip field is and the rest? Am I understanding that correctly?
This is the only time this is for comments, unfortunately. It's just for comments.
Well, what I'm saying is there's just too many homes. If you compare it to the villages, and you go with these columns of homes that you have with only 20-foot roads, they are not adequate for any kind of vehicles. Even if I have to try to sell a home on these streets, trying to park there, trying to meet a client there, there's no room for this. There's just no room. There's just too many homes on this small piece of property. And it doesn't look nice. People don't like it living there. I can just tell you, they comment about it all the time. And I don't think, if you did that in the villages, I think you'd be making the same mistake again. You need to just have a little bit less homes there, not so many, and make it more desirable and more attractive. It's not even attractive the way it is. It just looks like housing on the early 20th century down in Philadelphia. So I don't think it's modern. It's not enough room. Okay?
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, does
Mr.
the board
Jonas.
want to take a short recess before we close the hearing?
Did you have one question?
Please, just one comment by the applicant with regard to the proposed condition that the Planning Commission made with regard to emergency access. We have the one emergency access available to us through an easement already recorded and in place. I would caution against the condition that we provide a second at Mulligan Lane, because that essentially puts our destiny in the hands of the HOA.
Correct.
We would prefer that not to happen, so thank you for that consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Jaros, did you receive the updated list from the Planning Commission before the discussion tonight, before Mr. Rawlings' presentation?
Mr. Rawlings was kind enough to hand us that before the hearing convened, yes.
Has the applicant been able to, had the time to look at that to see if any of the conditions that are not already incorporated in your evidence would be acceptable to the applicant?
Again, with the exception of what I just spoke to, the second emergency access connection at Mulligan Road, I believe, and I'm going to look to my clients, the rest of these appeared to be in order. But if you'll give me 1 second.
Mr. Jarrett, do you have that easement as part of the exhibit? What it actually, the language within it?
No, Mr. Winters, I don't, but I was informed by one of my partners who was involved in that, who told me today that there is a recorded easement for that emergency access at that location.
And who is that owned by? Is that owned by the township or HOA?
I believe that's owned by the
Township
HOA,
parties? Not the township?
not the township, to my knowledge. Mr. Jonas, in response to your question, I have had an opportunity to speak to my client, and generally, with the exception of what I just spoke to, these conditions proposed by the Planning Commission seem acceptable.
Those are the bullet points on the bottom of page 2,
Correct,
with the exception of the second emergency access.
at Mulligan Road, yes. Just so the board is aware, we will make every attempt to try and obtain that second access, but we just didn't want to condition potentially that we can't meet.
If I can just add one thing, just for clarity, in the roadway from,
Kelly, hang on a second. Ms. Kelly, you wanted to say something? The board's going to recess for a few minutes, but before that, do you have something you want to say?
quick comment on the roadway from 322 in the project. The third bullet under that says that the 28 and 24-foot sections of road should be built to the PennDOT specs. The 24-foot is going to all be private. That's the section in blue up on A13 now. So I would think that's just a township code or to something acceptable to the applicant.
The board's going to take a recess for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in the session. The board is going to close the hearing. The board has 45 days from today to issue a written decision. The board has the authority under the Township Ordinance and the Municipalities Planning Code to impose conditions. Conditions can be those based on ordinance provisions, conditions that have been accepted by the applicant, or reasonable conditions that have been based on the evidence presented. So with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.